Is Joe Biden Bernie Sanders? Yesterday, the Wall Street Journal published an article titled, Joe Biden is Bernie Sanders, making the claim that because of Joe Biden's proposal for a billionaire's tax and his sweeping infrastructure plan, he's the most progressive Democratic president they've ever seen thus far. So progressive, he is Bernie Sanders. Joining us to discuss this is sabrinasalvati. You may know her from the Sabby show. She is the host, and she's also the co-host of the Revolutionary Black Network. Sabby, welcome to the show. It's so good to see you.
Hi, Tara. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, that's great. So I don't know if you've been, well, I know you've been kind of calling out the progressives really well, actually, about them not really standing up for working folks. And did you see the oversight committee hearing with AOC and all of that? And I just wanted your thoughts on where the progressives are going and what happened. And AOC was, promoting censorship at the oversight hearing. What are your thoughts on that?
I did see it. I think, this is a classic tale of what we've seen before with people that go into the Democratic Party that try to push back against Democratic Party leadership. So Cynthia McKinney had this experience. Dennis Kucinich also had this experience. And those individuals were pushed out of the Democratic Party. They were pushed out of their seats by Democratic leadership. I think what happened, I think in the beginning, some of the progressives actually did have good intentions going into these positions to fight back and to push back. We did see when AOC was first elected, she did protest outside of Nancy Pelosi's office. And then there must have been a conversation shortly after that, because after that experience, she was on The View when she was calling Nancy Pelosi Mama Bear. So someone had a talking to, I would say. I think that they realized that in order to keep their seats, that they have to go along with Democratic Party leadership. And that's unfortunate because that's not what Justice Democrats was designed for. It was designed for the exact opposite. But at this point, what's really disappointing is that they have seemed to convince the American people that they are socialists, that they are further left, when in reality, they've just gone along with corporate Democrats. So I think that's the downfall that we see with the situation, is that it gives people the impression, working class people, the impression that there is someone in there fighting for them when they're really not.
Right. Yeah. And what was really stunning was that in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, and I talked about it to the audience right before you came on, they were talking that Bernie Sanders, actually, they were talking about Joe Biden and comparing him to Bernie Sanders. Now, I've met Joe Biden. He's no Bernie Sanders, but they're calling him the most progressive Democrat in history. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, I was baffled by that statement.
I think part of the problem is you have some of the progressives, including Bernie Sanders, saying that Joe Biden is doing a great job or giving him an A grade, congratulating him for things that he really should not be congratulated for. So I think Joe Biden took some of Bernie Sanders' talking points and he did distribute those during the State of the Union address, like we need to fight for the working class, we got to protect the workers, those types of talking points that came from that Bernie Sanders campaign and that progressive movement. So because he's saying those things, you do have some people saying, oh, Joe Biden is just like Bernie Sanders, which is absolutely ridiculous. Joe Biden did explain to people during the State of the Union address that he is a capitalist. Bernie Sanders describes himself as a democratic socialist. So how are they the same? They're not the same. If he were Bernie Sanders, we would be having something like Medicare for all right now, which Joe Biden said that he would veto that bill if it came across his desk. So I think, again, the problem with putting progressives through the Democratic Party is that it gives people the impression that the Democratic Party has moved further to the left, when I would argue the Democratic Party has moved further to the right, especially when you look at issues such as censorship and war as well. So it gives people a false impression. And when doing that, when they do that, that actually silences the voices of those who actually are further to the left, because they've kind of been drowned out. Look at the Progressive Caucus. How many people in the Progressive Caucus are actually progressive? Some of them don't even support Medicare for all, but they're allowed to be a part of an organization that was co-founded by Bernie Sanders, and there's no pushback from it. So I think a lot of these people have just become careerists, and that's all they care about at this point in time.
Yeah, it's really amazing too. Joe Biden's domestic policy to me doesn't seem progressive at all. I mean, that's my perception of it. And in fact, we look at the debacle with the railroad. You look at some of the other workers that were trying to come forward and have some real labor issues. Uplifted by some of these members of Congress. It just doesn't happen. So I think it's almost like we're being just gaslighted. I mean, I don't know if that's your into believing because he's going to be running for president again that he's actually progressive when he's not.
100%. And when you talk about the railroad workers, I think it's important for people to remember that even though the Senate voted against the 7-day sick leave, Joe Biden could have implemented that by executive order and he chose not to. So it was really funny to me that he had the audacity to talk about protecting the workers and he had the advantage to do that and he chose not to do it. So I think people really need to pay attention to things that have happened along in his presidency and not just listen to what he says, because Joe Biden, there were a number of lies that he told during that State of the Union address. If we want to look at the economy, he said the economy is doing great and that prices are down. Prices are not down. I was just at the grocery store the other day. I paid $9 for a carton of eggs. He said that gas prices were down. Not where I live. The gas prices are still high. They have not gone down. But everybody will just listen to what he says and they won't actually check the evidence to see if what he's saying is actually true. Thousands of workers are being laid off by Amazon, by Google, by Facebook. But Joe Biden stood there and said to the American people that the economy is doing well. The economy is not doing well. The homelessness rate has increased in this country. We're seeing it in cities across the country. It's not just Los Angeles. It's happening here in Boston as well. It's happening in places like Austin, Texas. This is an increasing threat that we have in this country. And nobody, regardless of who they are in office, is trying to address the poverty issue that we have in this country. So I think when we look at the economics, Joe Biden has also continued some of Trump tax policies. People aren't calling that out. The progressives aren't calling that out. Kids are still in cages at the border. The progressives aren't calling that out. AOC was in tears when she saw kids at the border when Trump was in office. She doesn't have those tears now. So I think this is just a political game and it's a lot of theater. And unfortunately, the American people are the ones who are suffering as a result.
Well, I agree 100%. And I mean, you're talking about a poverty rate with children right now that's in excess of 20%. And, they're talking about cutting the school lunch programs and things like that. And they've cut back on benefits because, of course, some of the benefits were cut. So the people, that are the poorest are really suffering the most. And that brings me to the next subject is his foreign policy, right? How in the world could anyone see Joe Biden as comparable to any progressive? Well, actually, Bernie Sanders voted for it too, but I'm talking about the money going to Ukraine. Almost $100 billion at this point has gone to Ukraine in aid and weapons. So again, that brings us to what we can do to try to push back on that. And, I kind of wanted your insight about Joe Biden's foreign policy. I mean, do you see it in any way as progressive, or how do you see it?
No, this is just the same as presidents who came before him. They're trying to profit off of war. I want to remind everyone that with this conflict with Russia and Ukraine, there were peace talks in the beginning. There were negotiations in the beginning. The United States government decided not to go that route because there's more money to be made when you have war. This is also an opportunity for them to punish countries like Russia, because when we look at a country like Russia and we look at China, these are economic threats to the United States. If you were to look at the top largest banks in the world, China has 5 in the top 10. The United States only has 2. This was not always the case. So the reason why they are pushing these types of conflicts is to cripple Russia's economy and then next to cripple China's economy so the U.S. can be number 1 in the world. And here we are. The U.S. government has sent billions of dollars to Ukraine, but they can't give everybody health care in this country, or they won't give everyone health care in this country. They always say the money isn't there. They have shown us over the past year there's plenty of money there. If they were to reduce the defense budget, we could give people what they need in this country. We could give homes to everybody in this country, but they don't want to do that. They want to support companies like Lockheed Martin. They want to support companies like Raytheon, companies like Northrop Grumman, who are pretty much invested in the military industrial complex. This is a money laundering scheme. That is what this is about. How long is this conflict supposed to continue? How much more money are they going to give to Ukraine and give the American people very little? So more people need to call this out. And I would highly recommend that if you can do so, to participate in these rallies in your area. There are multiple rallies going on for peace in Ukraine to end this conflict. So any way that you can get involved, please do so. We need to have an anti-war movement back in this country. I don't think there's been one or been a prominent one since the Vietnam War. But I think that was more prominent because at that point in time, there was the draft. So I think it affected people more. But we have to get back to that point in this country because they are really trying to silence any type of anti-war rhetoric.
It's really interesting you brought that up because I was just thinking about I'm going to be seeing you actually in Washington, D.C. at Rage Against the War Machine. We're both going to be at that rally. Do you want to talk about like why? Because I'm on the West Coast, you're on the East Coast, and what the feelings are back there. Because here, there just seems to be a lack of, I don't know, no one's really getting out in the streets. No one's doing anything to protest this proxy war the U.S. and NATO is fighting against Russia via Ukraine, which is actually what it is. And like you said, it's profiting these weapons manufacturers. So we have a chance to all meet up February 19th in D.C. And I know you're going to be there, right?
Yep, I will be there. I'll be streaming the event. I think that I'm fortunate in the sense that I am on the East Coast and DC is here. A lot of those demonstrations just happen to take place in DC. We have a couple
Mhm.
here that happen in Boston, but we don't get anywhere near the numbers that they get in DC for these types of events. So it's not far from me or too far from me. So it's easier for me to get there. But I would like to see these demonstrations happen across the country. Like more people need to know about it. The problem is, I think that the American people are heavily propagandized by mainstream media. It's CNN, it's MSNBC, it's Fox News, and the majority of Americans don't watch independent media. Unfortunately, the majority of Americans, as much as people want to complain about Jimmy Dore, the majority of Americans have no idea who he is. So that's a big part of the problem is like we do have these voices, but I think our mics are a little too small, at this point to reach many people. But the rally in DC, I think it's going to be huge based on what I've seen. It looks like it's going to be a good turnout. So I'm looking forward to meeting people that come there and hearing the speakers and everything. There's been some like pushback and criticism about the rally, about some of the speakers. That's a whole nother story. But I think that it's tricky because I've been to multiple rallies and I've organized with other organizations such as Massachusetts, like Peace Action here in Boston.
Mhm.
There's always going to be someone. There's always going to be someone who's a speaker who people may have issues with. I think it is up to the organizers at this point to decide what direction they do want to go in. But I will say, like, if you can come out, if you can't come to that rally, there's another one in March that's by Answer Coalition, also for peace in Ukraine. If you can come to that one, that would be great as well.
I think it's really important. And it's February 19th, Rage Against the War Machine. And you can check it out. Sabby will be there. I'm one of the speakers, as is Kim Iversen. And I believe some other prominent people, of course, Jimmy Dore will be speaking. Scott Horton, Max Blumenthal, Scott Ritter, and some others will be at that rally talking about it. And I believe even Tulsi Gabbard will be showing up. So you have like what I found interesting about this particular rally is that it's organized by libertarians. It's organized by many people that perceive as the right. There's some conservatives there. And then you have some lefties as well. And so you have this convergence. So of course, there's a little bit of drama. There always would be with groups like that coming together, right? But I guess I wanted to ask you one last question before you go here is about where is the progressives? Why did Bernie Sanders and AOC vote for the war? Why aren't their voices being heard in DC?
That's a good question. And there have been activists that have approached them at town halls. I'm sure you've seen Jose and
Yeah.
a couple of others as well that have approached them and
Mhm.
asked that very same question. At this point, I think it's best for AOC and Bernie Sanders to answer that question. Why did you
Yeah.
vote for it? If you're a part of Democratic Socialists of America, you're not supposed to be pro-war. You're supposed to be against that. Why did they choose to be strike breakers in reference to the railroad workers? Again, that is against principles of Democratic Socialists of America, which they're a part of. So I think what it's going to take is some of these organizations that they're members of pushing back on them and honestly removing them from the organization at this point if they don't represent the principles. But I think they're not going to do that because their organization is propped up by those names, by those members. So I think that's a big part of the problem. But I think they voted for it in an attempt to get along with Democratic leadership. Whatever Democrat leadership tells them to do, that's what they're going to do. And it's unfortunate at this point. And I think they need to stop calling themselves progressives, to be honest.
Well said. Thank you so much, Sabby. And for those that want to find you, tell them a little bit about the Sabby Sabs show, which is your podcast, when that is and what time.
Yes, you can find me on YouTube at Sabby Sabs. I usually stream on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sundays. Or you can find me on Revolutionary Blackout Network. There's a collection of us there, of the members of the group. So you'll hear multiple different voices, not just mine. And you can find us there. I mean, we stream like every day over on Revolutionary Blackout Network.
Well, great. And I also see some of your work on INN. They post it too, Indie News Network. So shout out to Indy and Reef that do that hard work. And thank you for all that you do. And you're right. We need more independent voices in media being heard so our audiences can hear it, like Kim Iversen show, like your show, Sabby Sabs, and like the Black Revolutionary Network. So thank you so much for joining us today. And Sabby, I really look forward to seeing you in person in Washington, D.C. So we'll see you then.
Thanks so much, Tara.
Thanks.